A dog was returned to the same animal shelter 11 times. 11 different families adopted him, and 11 times he escaped and found his way back. They called him an escape artist. They called him unadoptable. They called him a lost cause. And then one day, a woman on the behavior team finally understood what everyone had been missing. She looked at this dog who kept running away from every home he was given, and she said 5 words that changed everything. He knows he has work to do. This is the story of a dog named Gumby and the 11 escapes that led him exactly where he was meant to be. The Charleston Animal Society sits on the outskirts of North Charleston, South Carolina, a sprawling facility of concrete and chain link and hope that takes in thousands of animals every year. If you've never been inside an animal shelter, it's hard to describe the particular atmosphere of one. The constant background noise of barking, the smell of disinfectant barely masking the smell of animals, the fluorescent lights and the tile floors, and the feeling that you're standing in a place where lives are decided, where futures hang in the balance, where every day brings both heartbreak and miracle in equal measure. The Charleston Animal Society is a no-kill shelter, which means they don't give up on animals easily. It means they have developed, over years of doing this work, a kind of patience that borders on stubborn hope. They have rehabilitated dogs that other shelters would have written off. They have found homes for animals that seemed impossible to place. They have learned that sometimes the hardest cases are the ones that teach you the most, and sometimes the animal you think you can't help turns out to be the one who helps everyone else. But even by their standards, they had never seen anything quite like Gumby. He arrived on a September morning in 2014, the kind of morning in coastal South Carolina where the humidity wraps around you like a wet blanket, and the air smells like salt and marsh grass and something green and growing. He was brought in as a stray, found wandering near a residential neighborhood. No collar, no tags, no microchip. A hound mix, the intake form said, tall and lanky, maybe 50 pounds, with a white coat and floppy ears and brown patches around his eyes that gave him a perpetually curious expression. His age was estimated somewhere between 3 and 4 years old, based on his teeth and his energy level and the way he carried himself. Unlike most strays the shelter encountered, Gumby was healthy and well-fed. His coat was clean, his body strong, his ribs not visible under his skin. This wasn't a dog who had been living on the streets for long. This was a dog who had been someone's pet, probably recently, probably loved. Someone had fed him well and kept him groomed, and then, for reasons nobody would ever know, he had ended up wandering alone until animal control picked him up and brought him here. The staff figured he was either a runaway or a cast-off. Hounds were common in the South, bred for generations to track scents and chase game, and the ones who didn't make it as hunting dogs often found themselves abandoned by frustrated owners, or wandering away from homes that couldn't contain their instinct to roam. Either way, Gumby seemed friendly enough, good-natured, tail-wagging, the kind of dog who would find a home quickly. They processed his intake paperwork, gave him his vaccinations, checked him for any health issues, and assigned him a kennel in the adoption wing. A volunteer named Linda was the first to really spend time with him. She came in 3 afternoons a week to walk dogs and socialize them, preparing them for the families who might adopt them. She remembers taking Gumby out to the play yard that first week and being struck by how calm he was, how attentive. Most dogs in shelters were anxious, overstimulated, desperate for any kind of attention. Gumby was different. He seemed to be watching her, studying her, trying to understand something that she couldn't quite put into words. He had these eyes, Linda would say later, trying to describe it to people who hadn't met him. Like he was looking right through you, like he knew something you didn't. Within a week of his arrival, a family had fallen in love with him. A nice couple in their 40s with a fenced yard and 2 kids who couldn't stop talking about the white dog with the floppy ears. They came to meet him in the adoption room, and Gumby was perfect, gentle with the children, calm with the parents, polite and friendly without being overwhelming. They filled out the paperwork, paid the adoption fee, loaded Gumby into their minivan with a new collar and a bag of food and a toy the kids had picked out, and drove him home to start his new life. 3 days later, Gumby was back at the shelter. He had escaped. Somehow, despite the fenced yard, despite the closed doors, despite every precaution the family had taken, Gumby had found a way out. The kids had been devastated. They'd woken up on the 3rd morning to find his bed empty, the gate to the backyard standing open, no sign of the dog they'd already started to love. They'd searched for hours, driving through the neighborhood, calling his name, putting up hastily made signs on telephone poles. And then someone called to say they'd found a white hound wandering near an animal shelter on the other side of town. Not just any animal shelter, the Charleston Animal Society. The exact place he'd come from. The family was confused and heartbroken. How had he known to go back there? How had he even found his way? Their house was miles from the shelter, across busy roads and unfamiliar neighborhoods. And why had he wanted to leave in the first place? They'd been good to him. They'd loved him. They'd done everything right. The shelter staff reassured them that this was normal, that dogs sometimes escaped from new environments, that it took time for them to adjust. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he just needed a little longer to understand that this new place was home now. But the family was shaken. They couldn't handle the worry, couldn't spend every night wondering if he was going to run again. If the next time he escaped, he would get hit by a car or attacked by another animal or lost forever. They surrendered him back to the shelter with apologies and tears. A week later, another family adopted Gumby. This time it lasted 6 days. Same story. The dog escaped, was found near the shelter, was returned. The second family was apologetic and confused, just like the first. They didn't know how he'd gotten out. The yard was secure, the doors were locked. And yet somehow, this dog had found a way to leave. Not to run wild, not to chase a squirrel into the woods, but to make his way back to this specific building, this specific location, as if he had a map in his head pointing him back to the place everyone kept trying to take him away from. The staff started to take notice. 2 escapes could be a coincidence. 2 escapes could be explained by adjustment anxiety or unfamiliar territory or bad luck with a faulty latch. But there was something strange about the way Gumby kept ending up back at the shelter specifically, not wandering the streets, not lost in some random neighborhood, not anywhere else in the greater Charleston area. Here, at the Charleston Animal Society, every single time. They started warning potential adopters about his escape artist tendencies. They made sure families knew what they were getting into. This dog could open latches, could squeeze through impossibly small gaps, could jump fences that seemed too high for his lanky frame. He needed a family that was prepared for the challenge, a family that would be vigilant and patient, a family that wouldn't give up. The third adopter was exactly that kind of family. A man named Robert who lived alone in a house he'd inherited from his parents. With experience raising hounds all his life, he understood the breed's tendency to wander. He understood the stubbornness, the independence, the nose that could lead a dog 10 miles in pursuit of an interesting scent. He was absolutely determined to make this work. During his time with Robert, Gumby was returned to the shelter 4 separate times. The first time, a good Samaritan found him wandering on a highway service road 2 miles from Robert's house and recognized him from a lost dog post on social media. She brought him to the shelter because that was the contact information on the post, and Robert came to pick him up within hours, confused but undeterred. He checked every inch of his fence, reinforced the gate, added a padlock. The second time, animal control picked Gumby up near a strip mall, again heading in the direction of the shelter. Robert reinforced the fence again. He started keeping Gumby inside when he wasn't home, crating him even though he hated the idea of confining such an active dog. The third and fourth times, Robert drove Gumby back to the shelter himself. He was increasingly desperate, increasingly afraid. Every escape was a risk. Every escape could be the one where Gumby ran into traffic, or got attacked by a stray, or got lost for real in a way that ended in tragedy. Robert loved this dog. He didn't want to give up, but he was starting to realize that keeping Gumby might mean losing him in the worst possible way. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from loving something you cannot keep. Robert felt it every time he looked at Gumby, every time he watched him, sleeping peacefully on the dog bed in the corner of the living room, every time he thought about what might happen if the next escape was the last one. He had raised hounds his entire adult life. He knew their stubbornness, their independence, their tendency to follow a scent trail to the ends of the earth if nothing stopped them. But he had never met a dog like Gumby, a dog who seemed to be following something other than a scent. A dog who seemed to know exactly where he was going and why. Robert tried everything he could think of. He installed a higher fence. He added a buried wire at the base to prevent digging. He put child-proof latches on every gate. He walked Gumby 3 times a day, hoping that enough exercise would satisfy whatever restless energy was driving him to escape. He consulted with trainers and veterinarians and anyone who might have insight into why this particular dog was so determined to leave. Nothing worked. One evening after the third escape, Robert sat on his back porch with a beer in his hand, watching Gumby explore the yard. The dog moved with that easy hound grace, nose to the ground, tail wagging gently, completely content in the moment. He didn't look like a dog who was planning an escape. He looked like a dog who was home. But Robert knew better now. He knew that something in Gumby was always listening for something else, always waiting for an opportunity, always ready to run. Not away from Robert. He didn't think Gumby was running from him. The dog seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, seemed happy in the house, seemed grateful for the food and the walks and the comfortable bed. But there was something pulling Gumby toward that shelter, something stronger than the fence or the latches or Robert's love. The fourth time Robert brought him back, his eyes were red and his voice was thick, and he stood in the shelter lobby apologizing to staff members who didn't need an apology, explaining himself to people who understood completely. "I can't do it anymore," he said. "I can't keep waiting for him to get killed. I love him too much to let that happen." He signed the surrender paperwork with a hand that trembled slightly, and then he knelt down, scratched Gumby behind his floppy ears, and whispered something that nobody else could hear. And then he walked out, and Gumby watched him go, and the staff watched Gumby, and nobody knew what to say. The shelter was starting to understand that they had a problem. This wasn't a dog who was running away from something. This wasn't a dog who was scared or confused or struggling to adapt. This was a dog who was running towards something. Every time he escaped, he came back to the same place. Every time he was given a new home, he rejected it in favor of the place everyone kept trying to remove him from. It was almost as if he was trying to tell them something obvious, something right in front of their faces that they kept failing to see. They tried everything they could think of to find Gumby a permanent home. They worked with rescue groups that specialized in difficult placements. They tried pairing him with a female hound as a package deal, thinking maybe companionship would keep him from running. They put him through extra training sessions with the shelter's behavior team, hoping that obedience work would somehow satisfy whatever restless impulse was driving him to escape. Nothing worked. In March of 2015, a fourth brave soul adopted Gumby. This time it was a woman named Patricia, a retired school teacher who lived on a small farm outside the city. She had acreage for him to run on, other animals for him to socialize with, and a lifetime of experience with difficult dogs. She had read his entire file, asked every question she could think of, and left the shelter confident that she understood what she was getting into. For 4 months, the staff didn't hear a word about Gumby. They checked in with Patricia periodically and got positive reports. Gumby was settling in. Gumby was happy. Gumby seemed to love the farm. He was getting along with her other dogs, following her around while she did chores, sleeping at the foot of her bed at night. He hadn't tried to escape once. The staff was cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was it. Maybe the key was space and freedom, the kind of environment where a hound could run and explore without feeling confined. Maybe Patricia had figured out what all the other adopters had missed. 4 months felt significant. 4 months felt like proof that it was finally working. Then, on July 5th, a familiar white face appeared at the shelter's intake desk. The staff member who processed him, a young woman named Brianna, who had been there for 2 of his previous returns, felt her heart sink when she saw him. She had let herself hope, the way everyone had let themselves hope. She had started telling people that Gumby had found his forever home. And now here he was, sitting in the intake area with his tongue lolling and his tail wagging, looking for all the world like a dog who had just accomplished something important. Patricia couldn't explain what had happened. One day, everything was fine. The next day, Gumby was gone. She had searched everywhere. Her property was large, full of places a dog could hide, and found nothing. A week later, Animal Control picked him up on a road that led, of course, toward Charleston. He had traveled miles across unfamiliar territory, past farms and neighborhoods and highways, navigating by some internal compass that nobody could explain, heading back to the shelter he had already escaped from 3 times before. "I don't understand," Patricia said when she called to tell them he'd been found. Her voice was tired and confused and tinged with something that might have been awe. "He was happy here, I could see it. He was happy." But not happy enough, apparently, to stay. In August, Gumby was adopted a 5th time. Less than 2 months later, he showed up at a sister shelter in Berkeley County, 30 miles from Charleston, 30 miles. He had traveled 30 miles on foot to get to an animal shelter, crossing highways and neighborhoods and territory he'd never seen before. When the Berkeley County shelter scanned his microchip and saw where he'd come from, they called the Charleston Animal Society immediately. The staff drove out to pick him up, and on the ride back, Gumby sat in the back of the van looking out the window, calm as could be, like this was all perfectly normal. They started calling this adventure Gumby's Walkabout. There was something almost mythical about it. A dog traveling 30 miles across unfamiliar territory, navigating obstacles that should have stopped him, passing 100 places where he could have given up or gotten lost, and arriving at another animal shelter like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't even the right shelter. It was a sister facility, a different location, a building Gumby had never seen before. But it was close enough, apparently. It was an animal shelter, and animal shelters were where Gumby belonged. The staff members at the Charleston Animal Society talked about Gumby constantly now. He had become something of a legend among them, a running joke that was also a profound mystery. In the break room, over coffee and sandwiches, they would speculate about what was driving him. Some thought he was traumatized in some way they couldn't detect, that something about the shelter felt safe in a way that homes didn't. Some thought he had simply imprinted on the staff and couldn't bond with anyone else. Some thought, half seriously, that he was some kind of guardian spirit, that he had been sent to the shelter for reasons that had nothing to do with being adopted. Nobody knew the truth, not yet. His 6th adoption was brief. The new family's existing dog didn't get along with Gumby's exuberant personality, and within a week he was back. His 7th adoption lasted about 2 weeks before he escaped again. His 8th, his 9th, his 10th, each one ending the same way, with Gumby finding his way back to the shelter, back to the staff who were starting to feel like they knew him better than any adopter ever could. By the time the 10th adoption failed, something had shifted in the way the staff talked about him. They no longer spoke of finding him a forever home as though it were an inevitable, happy ending. They spoke of it more carefully now, more tentatively, as though they were starting to wonder whether the happy ending they had been looking for was the wrong one entirely. By December of 2015, the staff was exhausted. They had tried everything. They had warned every potential adopter. They had done their absolute best to find this dog a home, and 11 times, 11 separate times over more than a year, he had found his way back to them. They decided to give it one more try, one last adoption, one final attempt to place Gumby in a forever family. The adopter was a single man, patient and experienced with dogs, who understood exactly what he was getting into. He had read Gumby's file, heard all the warnings, prepared his home with reinforced fencing and secure latches and every precaution he could think of. He took Gumby home on December 6th, confident and determined. By January 4th, he was back at the shelter, surrendering the dog with a mixture of frustration and bewilderment. Gumby had escaped 3 times in less than a month. One of those times, he had busted straight through a screen door, just launched himself at it, and crashed through the mesh like it wasn't even there. The man had also tried to housebreak him, but Gumby seemed to refuse to learn. Accidents in the house, over and over, as if he was deliberately being difficult. At this point, nobody could tell if that was genuine stubbornness or some kind of strategy. Was this a hound being typically hard-headed? Or was this a dog who had figured out that being messy and troublesome was one more way to get sent back to the place he actually wanted to be? The staff at the Charleston Animal Society finally made a decision. They were done trying, not done with Gumby. They would never be done with Gumby, but done attempting to adopt him out. 11 families had tried. 11 families had failed. If this dog was determined to live at the shelter, then maybe it was time to stop fighting him and start listening. They officially adopted Gumby themselves. He became a permanent resident of the Charleston Animal Society, with his own spot in what they called the 300 section, his own bed, his own food bowl, his own name on the roster of staff animals. He was no longer an adoptable dog waiting for a family. He was an employee. He was home. He had been trying to tell them for over a year, and finally they understood. But understanding that Gumby belonged at the shelter was only the beginning. Understanding why he belonged there, that took a little longer. Doña Satriale was the behavior team leader at the Charleston Animal Society, a woman who had spent years studying animal behavior and learning to read the subtle cues that dogs use to communicate. She had been watching Gumby for months, puzzling over him, trying to understand what made this particular dog so determined to stay in this particular place. She had seen difficult dogs before. She had seen dogs who couldn't adapt to home life, dogs who needed specialized environments, dogs whose traumatic histories made traditional adoption impossible. But Gumby didn't fit any of those categories. He wasn't traumatized. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't fearful or reactive. He was, by all appearances, a perfectly normal, friendly, well-adjusted dog who simply refused to live anywhere except an animal shelter. And then one day, watching him interact with a new arrival, a terrified pit bull mix, who had been surrendered after his owner died, who cowered in the corner of his kennel and growled at anyone who approached, Doña finally saw it. Gumby had positioned himself near the new dog's kennel, lying down, making himself small and non-threatening. He wasn't looking at the pit bull directly. That would have been confrontational. He was just there, calm and present, radiating a kind of quiet confidence that seemed to say, nothing bad is going to happen. I'm here, you're safe. And the pit bull was responding. His growling had stopped. His body, which had been tense and coiled, was slowly relaxing. His eyes, which had been wild with fear, were focused on Gumby with something that looked almost like curiosity. Doña watched as, over the course of an hour, Gumby gradually moved closer to the frightened dog. Not approaching directly, not making any sudden movements, just shifting his position inch by inch, until he was lying right against the chain link that separated their kennels. The pit bull watched him the whole time, and when Gumby finally settled in his new position and closed his eyes, the pit bull did something remarkable. He lay down too. For the first time since he'd arrived at the shelter, he lay down and rested. That was when Doña understood. "He knows he has work to do," she told the rest of the staff. "That's why he keeps coming back. He's not running away from the families who adopt him. He's running toward the dogs who need him. He has a gift, and he can't use it in someone's living room. He can only use it here." Once they knew what to look for, they saw it everywhere. Whenever a new dog arrived at the shelter, terrified, shaking, overwhelmed by the noise and the smells and the unfamiliar faces, Gumby seemed to sense it. He would change his behavior, become calmer, quieter, more grounded. He would position himself near the frightened dog, not intruding, just present. And something about his presence seemed to ease their fear in ways the human staff couldn't replicate. Dogs who had been cowering in the corners of their kennels would relax when Gumby was nearby. Dogs who had been barking frantically hour after hour would settle into silence. Dogs who had been so terrified they couldn't eat would finally accept food when Gumby lay down next to them. It was as if he was speaking a language that only other dogs could understand. And what he was saying was, "You're safe here. I've got you. It's going to be okay." The behavior team started using Gumby intentionally. He became their go-to dog for acclimating new arrivals, the first friend that scared and reactive dogs would meet. They would bring Gumby into the assessment room when they were evaluating a difficult dog, and his calm presence would often reveal a gentler side that fear had been hiding. They used him for behavioral demonstrations, showing nervous dogs what good behavior looked like, what relaxation felt like, what trust could be. They called him their ambassador, their translator between species. There was a dog named Duke who arrived at the shelter in the spring of 2016, a massive Mastiff mix who had been found chained to a fence behind an abandoned house. Duke was terrified of everything: people, other dogs, sudden movements, loud noises. He would press himself into the corner of his kennel and shake, refusing to eat, refusing to make eye contact, refusing to engage with the world at all. The staff had tried everything: gentle handlers, special treats, calming music, medication. Nothing worked. Duke was so shut down that some of the staff worried he might never come out of it, that whatever trauma he had experienced had broken something inside him that couldn't be repaired. And then someone suggested they try Gumby. They brought Gumby to Duke's kennel and let him lie down outside the bars. No pressure, no expectations. Just a calm, confident dog being present with a frightened one. For 3 days, that's all they did. Let Gumby spend time near Duke. Let Duke get used to his presence. Let whatever silent communication was happening between them do its work. On the 4th day, Duke ate his food while Gumby was nearby. The first time he had eaten in anyone's presence since he arrived. On the 6th day, Duke approached the front of his kennel when Gumby walked by, pressing his nose against the bars to sniff him. On the 8th day, they let them meet in the play yard, and Duke, this massive, terrified, broken dog, played. He bowed and bounced and ran in circles with Gumby, and the staff members who were watching had to turn away because they were crying and didn't want to spook him. Duke was adopted 2 months later by a family with experience rehabilitating traumatized dogs. He is, by all accounts, thriving, but none of that would have happened without Gumby. None of that would have happened if someone had looked at Duke when he arrived and decided he was too far gone to save. There were dozens of stories like that, hundreds maybe, over the years Gumby spent at the shelter. a pit bull named Rosie, who had been used as a bait dog and was terrified of other canines, until Gumby taught her that not every dog wanted to hurt her. A beagle named Chester, who had spent his entire life in a puppy mill and didn't know how to be a dog at all, until Gumby showed him how to play, how to relax, how to trust. A German shepherd named Max, who was so reactive that he had been returned twice for lunging and barking at other animals, until Gumby's calm presence taught him that he didn't have to be afraid, that he could meet the world with curiosity instead of aggression. He played with dozens of dogs every day, teaching them how to socialize, how to read other dogs' signals, how to be the kind of dog that a family would want to adopt. Every dog who left that shelter calmer than they arrived, friendlier, more confident, more adoptable, had Gumby to thank for part of that transformation. Every family who adopted a dog from the Charleston Animal Society, whether they knew it or not, was benefiting from Gumby's work. The staff finally understood why he had kept coming back. It wasn't that he couldn't adjust to a normal home. It wasn't that he was broken or difficult or impossible to place. It was that a normal home wasn't where he was needed. Every time a family adopted him and took him away from the shelter, they were taking him away from his purpose. They were taking him away from the anxious dogs who needed his calm presence, the scared dogs who needed his gentle guidance, the reactive dogs who needed someone to show them that the world wasn't as terrifying as they thought. Gumby had been running back to the shelter because that was where he belonged. That was where he could do the most good. That was where his gift could make a difference. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the staff discovered something else about Gumby that seemed almost too perfect to be true. The shelter had been dealing with an ongoing medical challenge: kittens with eye infections. Upper respiratory infections were common in shelter environments. So many animals in close quarters, stressed immune systems, viruses spreading easily from cage to cage. When these infections hit kittens, they often caused painful corneal ulcerations, damaging the delicate surface of the eye. The standard treatments helped, but slowly, and some kittens suffered for weeks before they healed. Some lost their vision entirely. Dr. Angela Bice, the Associate Director of Veterinary Care at the Charleston Animal Society, had been researching alternatives when she stumbled onto an unusual solution in an ophthalmology journal. A veterinary eye specialist had discovered that serum extracted from blood, specifically the healing components in the serum, could be used to treat corneal ulcerations with remarkable success. The serum accelerated healing, reduced scarring, and helped kittens recover faster with better outcomes than traditional treatments alone. There was just one challenge. To get enough serum to treat multiple kittens, you needed a blood donor. And not just any blood donor. You needed a healthy, large animal who was calm enough to tolerate regular blood. Draws available enough to donate every couple of weeks, and whose blood type was compatible with feline treatment. You needed, essentially, a dog who lived at the shelter full-time and who wouldn't mind being a recurring medical participant. Gumby was the obvious choice. He was healthy. He was large enough to donate safely. He was calm, happy-go-lucky, the staff called him, the kind of dog who took absolutely everything in stride. And as a permanent resident of the shelter, he would be available for regular blood draws for as long as he was needed. Dr. Lucy Fuller, the Senior Director of Veterinary Care, performed the first blood draw on a Tuesday afternoon. The veterinary team had prepared everything: the sterile equipment, the collection bags, the treats that would reward Gumby for his cooperation. They weren't sure how he would react. Some dogs tolerated blood draws easily, others fought and panicked and had to be sedated. Gumby lay on the examination table like he did this every day. His tail wagged gently against the metal surface. He looked at Dr. Fuller with those calm, intelligent eyes, and when she inserted the needle, he didn't flinch, he didn't whine. He just lay there, relaxed and trusting, as though he understood that this was important, that this was part of his job now. The staff member holding him scratched behind his ears and told him he was a good boy. Gumby's tail wagged harder. When it was done, they gave him a treat and let him go. He trotted back to the dog area immediately, as though the blood draw had been nothing more than a minor interruption in his day. He had a nervous shepherd mix to check on, a new arrival who had been cowering in the corner of his kennel all morning. Work to do. The serum extracted from his blood was administered to a kitten named Opie that same afternoon. Opie was a tiny orange tabby, barely 6 weeks old, whose eyes had been crusted with infection for days. The standard treatments had helped a little, but the ulcerations on his corneas were getting worse, not better. The veterinary team was worried that without something more, he might lose his sight. They applied the serum, just a few drops in each eye, and waited. Within 48 hours, the improvement was visible. The swelling was down, the crusting was clearing. Opie's eyes, which had been dull and painful, were starting to brighten. Within a week, he was healthy. His vision was intact. He was playing with the other kittens in the nursery, pouncing on toys and chasing balls of paper like nothing had ever been wrong. The treatment had worked better than anyone had hoped, and it had worked because of Gumby. Every 2 weeks after that, Gumby donated blood. The process became routine. He would walk into the veterinary clinic, hop up on the table, lie down calmly, and let the staff do their work. One draw from his large frame produced enough serum to treat 10 to 15 kittens. Over the months that followed, dozens of kittens were treated with the serum from his blood. Kittens who might have lost their sight. Kittens who might have suffered for weeks. Kittens who might not have made it at all. The healing properties in his blood, something about his particular immune system, his particular biology, were saving lives. Not just dog lives anymore, but cat lives too. A hound mix who had been labeled unadoptable was now one of the most valuable medical resources the shelter had. The Charleston Animal Society posted about it on social media, amazed by the full circle of Gumby's story. Here was a dog who had been labeled unadoptable, a dog who had been returned 11 times, a dog that nobody could seem to keep, and now he was one of the most valuable animals in the entire shelter. He had 2 jobs: comforting anxious dogs and healing sick kittens. He had a purpose that no traditional home could ever have given him, and he performed both jobs with a joy that seemed to radiate from every inch of his lanky, white-coated body. When the Charleston Animal Society produced their annual firefighter calendar, a fundraiser featuring local firefighters posing with adoptable shelter animals, Gumby was the obvious choice for one of the featured dogs. There he was, this escape artist who had run away from 11 homes, posing alongside a handsome firefighter named Adam Kraft from the North Charleston Fire Department. looking for all the world like the celebrity he had become. The calendar raised money for Toby's fund, the shelter's fund for medical care for injured, abandoned, and abused animals. Gumby wasn't just living at the shelter anymore. He was helping to fund its entire mission. Kay Hyman had been the director of community engagement at the Charleston Animal Society for more than 20 years at that point, and in all that time, she had never met a dog quite like Gumby. She had seen thousands of animals come through those doors. She had witnessed countless adoptions and countless returns, countless happy endings and countless heartbreaking losses. She had learned that animals could surprise you, that the ones who seemed most hopeless sometimes turned out to be the ones with the most to give. But Gumby was something else entirely. Gumby was a lesson in paying attention to what animals are actually trying to tell us, instead of just assuming we know what they need. He plays with over 50 dogs a day, Kay would tell visitors who came to meet the shelter's famous resident. He has all the treats and food he could ever want, and we love him like he's our own dog. She would pause, scratching behind his floppy ears while he leaned into her hand, content in a way that no house with a yard had ever made him. Because he is our own dog. He chose us. He kept choosing us over and over until we finally got the message. There is a lesson in Gumby's story, and it's not the lesson you might expect. We tend to think of adoption as the happy ending for shelter animals. We tell ourselves that the goal is to get every dog into a forever home, that success means empty kennels and full houses, that an animal living in a shelter is an animal waiting for its real life to begin. And for most animals, that's true. Most dogs do thrive in a home environment. Most dogs do want a family and a yard and a couch to sleep on and a person to call their own. But not every dog is most dogs. Some dogs have different purposes. Some dogs are needed in different places. Some dogs have gifts that only make sense in specific contexts, and trying to force them into a traditional life means taking them away from the very thing that gives their existence meaning. Gumby was never running away from the families who adopted him. He wasn't rejecting their love or refusing their care. He was running toward his calling. He was running back to the scared dogs who needed him, the anxious dogs who needed him, the sick kittens who needed his blood to heal. Every time someone tried to give him a normal life, he chose the extraordinary one instead. The shelter staff had thought they were failing him. 11 adoptions, 11 returns. By any normal measure, that looked like failure. That looked like a dog they couldn't place, a problem they couldn't solve, an animal who was somehow broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. But they weren't failing him at all. They were just misunderstanding him. They were trying to give him what they thought he should want, instead of paying attention to what he was telling them he actually needed. It's a mistake we make all the time with animals and with people. We have ideas about what success looks like, what happiness looks like, what a good life is supposed to be. We try to fit everyone into the same mold, and when someone doesn't fit, we call them difficult or broken or impossible to help. We don't stop to consider that maybe they're not broken at all. Maybe they just have a different definition of where they belong. Gumby knew where he belonged from the very beginning. It took 11 escapes, 11 returns, 11 families who couldn't keep him, before the humans around him finally figured it out. And when they did, when they stopped trying to adopt him out and started letting him be who he was, everything fell into place. Think about all the dogs whose lives were changed because Gumby was there to greet them when they arrived at the shelter. Think about the terrified strays who found comfort in his presence. Think about the reactive dogs who learned to trust because Gumby showed them how. Think about all the animals who left that shelter more adoptable, more confident, more ready for family life than they ever could have been without him. Think about the families who adopted those dogs, the children who grew up with pets, who might have been too scared to bond with them otherwise, the couples who found companionship with animals, who might have been too reactive to place, the seniors who got gentle, calm dogs because Gumby had taught those dogs how to be gentle and calm. None of that would have happened if the shelter had given up on him. None of that would have happened if they had sent him to a facility that wasn't no-kill, if they had decided after the 5th return, or the 8th return, or the 10th return, that this dog was simply too much trouble. The Charleston Animal Society's commitment to never giving up is what made Gumby's story possible. Their patience, their stubbornness, their refusal to stop believing that there was a place for him somewhere. That's what allowed them to finally understand what that place actually was. And think about the kittens, the tiny, sick kittens with infected eyes who would have suffered longer without Gumby's blood, who might have lost their sight, who might not have made it at all. A dog who had been labeled unadoptable was saving cats' lives every 2 weeks. If anyone had given up on him, those kittens would never have had the chance they needed. This is what happens when we stay patient with the ones who seem impossible to reach. This is what happens when we stop trying to force everyone into the same mold and start paying attention to who they actually are. This is what happens when we trust that maybe, just maybe, the animal or the person who doesn't fit our expectations might have their own kind of wisdom that we haven't learned to see yet. Gumby is still at the Charleston Animal Society. He's an old dog now, gray around his muzzle, slower than he used to be, somewhere in his mid-teens, which is ancient for a hound mix, a testament to the care he's received and the purpose that has kept him going. He has spent more than half his life in that shelter, not as a homeless animal waiting for something better, but as a staff member with an office and a legacy and a purpose that has shaped thousands of lives. His days look different now than they did in his prime. He sleeps more, naps in the sunny spots near the windows, conserves his energy for the moments when it matters. But he still knows when he's needed. When a new dog arrives at the shelter, terrified, trembling, overwhelmed by the chaos of this unfamiliar place, Gumby somehow senses it. He'll get up from his bed, stretch his old legs, and make his way over to the newcomer's kennel. He'll lie down nearby, not crowding, not demanding attention, just being present. And more often than not, that presence is enough. The younger members of the behavior team handle most of the difficult cases now, but they all learned from Gumby. They watched him work, studied his techniques, tried to understand the silent language he spoke with frightened animals. Some of them have been at the shelter for years, and they still talk about him with a kind of reverence, like he's something more than just a dog. He taught us that patience is a form of love, one of them said once, trying to explain it to a visitor. He taught us that you can't rush healing, that sometimes you just have to show up and be present and trust that it's enough. The dogs know. They always know. His blood donation sessions are less frequent now. His age makes the draws harder on his body, and the veterinary team doesn't want to strain him. But there are other dogs at the shelter who have followed in his footsteps. Other large, calm animals who donate blood for the kittens who need it. Gumby started something. He showed them that a dog could be more than just a pet, that an animal could have a purpose that extended beyond the boundaries of a single home. He still destroys the occasional pillow. There's a famous photo of him lying contentedly in the feathery remains of one he tore apart, looking completely unrepentant, because even staff members are allowed to have their moments of mischief. The photo hangs in the break room now, a reminder that even legendary dogs are still dogs. Even heroes have their quirks. The shelter has never once regretted adopting him themselves. He is their most famous resident, their most beloved colleague, their reminder of why this work matters. Every time someone hears about Gumby and visits the shelter, every time someone makes a donation, because his story touched them, every time someone adopts a different dog, because they learned about the Charleston Animal Society through Gumby's fame, that's his legacy too. He's been saving lives in ways nobody could have predicted when he first walked through those doors as a nameless stray in September of 2014. People come from all over to meet him now. They've read about him online, seen his picture on social media, heard his story from friends who heard it from other friends. They show up at the shelter and ask if they can visit the famous escape artist, and the staff always says yes. They take visitors back to Gumby's section, introduce them to this old white hound with the floppy ears and the calm eyes, and watch as people who have never met a dog quite like him try to understand what makes him special. It's hard to explain, really. In person, Gumby doesn't look extraordinary. He looks like a dog, a nice dog, a friendly dog, but nothing that would make you stop in your tracks. The magic isn't in how he looks, it's in what he does. It's in the way he carries himself, the way he reads a room, the way he seems to understand things that dogs aren't supposed to understand. One visitor, a woman in her 60s, who had driven 2 hours to meet him, spent almost an hour sitting on the floor of his section, just talking to him. The staff didn't interrupt. They let her have her time. And when she finally stood up to leave, she was crying. "My husband thought I was crazy," she told the staff member who walked her to the door. "He said it was just a dog. Why would I drive all this way to meet a dog? But I had to see for myself. I had to know if he was real." "And?" the staff member asked. The woman smiled through her tears. "He's real. He looked at me like he knew exactly why I needed to be here, like he understood. That's the thing about Gumby. He makes people feel understood. He makes people feel like maybe they're not as lost as they thought, like maybe there's a place for them somewhere, even if they haven't found it yet. He's a living reminder that the path to where you belong isn't always straight, that sometimes you have to get returned 11 times before you end up where you're supposed to be. There's a quote that Doña Satriale uses when she talks about Gumby. She says he kept coming back because he knew he had work to do. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe Gumby came back because he understood something about himself that the humans around him took 11 tries to learn. He knew he was needed. He knew there were scared dogs waiting for someone to show them that the world wasn't as dangerous as they feared. He knew there were sick kittens waiting for someone to help them heal. He knew there was a purpose for him at that shelter, a role that only he could fill, a job that mattered more than any fenced yard or comfortable couch or well-meaning family could ever provide. And every time someone tried to take him away from that purpose, he escaped and found his way back. 11 times. 11 escapes, 11 returns. Until finally everyone understood. Some of us aren't meant for the traditional path. Some of us have callings that look nothing like what other people expect from us. Some of us will be called difficult or broken or impossible over and over again until we find the place and the people who can finally see us for who we really are. Gumby found his place. It took 11 tries, but he got there. And once he did, he never tried to escape again. This was home. This was where he belonged. This was the work he was born to do. If Gumby's story reminded you that sometimes the ones who don't fit are exactly where they're supposed to be, subscribe for a new story every week. Each one is told with the same care, the same belief that there's a place for everyone, even if it takes 11 tries to find it. And if you know someone who's been told they don't fit, that they're too difficult, that there's no place for them, share this story. Because Gumby is proof that being different isn't the same as being wrong. Sometimes being different is exactly what the world needs.